All right, so we're going to start talking about interviewing, and in this lecture we're going to cover some of the basic things that you need to know so that your interviews, when you set them up, are going to run very smoothly. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is why interview at all? Well, interviews are actually very important to understanding your larger research question, and there's 3 reasons here that I've provided you with. First is interviewing is going to help you answer questions raised by your data collection. So as you are out in the field making your observations, you're going to notice things that happen, and you're also going to notice things that don't happen. And interviews allow you to talk to participants about why you're seeing what you're seeing. And as a result of talking to your participants about why you're seeing or not seeing the things that are going on in the field, the participants are going to be able to give you supportive or counter evidence. So the more you're in the field, the more you're going to start to have ideas about why things are happening. And then when you interview participants, you can sort of test your theories out and see if your interpretations and understandings of what you're seeing are correct, or if they're actually a little off, or sometimes really far off, because participants will be able to give you the evidence that you need to understand what you're seeing at a deeper level. And then finally, interviews allow participants to share their perspectives with you. Interviews give participants voice. They provide you with a very deep level of knowledge to help contextualize and better understand what it is that you have seen. They're going to give you information that you can't access through observational data alone. Now, how often should you interview, and how long should your interviews last? Well, first, your interviews need to be age appropriate. So as a general guideline, I would say elementary students are probably going to, elementary age students are probably going to be good for about 10 minutes, maybe 15 for interviewing. Middle and high school students can generally do a 15 to 30 minute interview. And then adults, of course, 30 minutes, 60 minutes probably being the max that I would ever interview anybody, because it does get tiring. Now, how often should you be interviewing your participants? Well, in a year-long study, I typically find that 3 interviews work. Now, of course, this is a study that's based, predominantly in field observations, and I'm using the interviews to get at and better understand these observations. And so what I do in a year-long study is I'll typically go into the field for about 6 to 8 weeks, enough that I've seen some things, I have a little bit of a handle on the situation, and I have some questions that I can go ahead and talk to people about. And then I'll come back a couple months later, so when I'm at about the halfway point, and then again at the very end. But if I'm doing a shorter study, like for example, if I'm only going to be doing a 3-month study, I don't need to do 3 interviews. It's possible that 2 interviews could be plenty. Putting again an interview in maybe about a month in when I've been in the field and have some idea about what's going on, and another one at the end. What you want to do in terms of thinking about how often is your interviews should help you deepen and understand your observational data, but you also don't want to tire your participants and be asking them for too much of their time. So you want to try to balance those things out. There's not a perfect answer here, really. The other thing to think about in terms of how long interviews should be is you might think, well, this is going to be a 20-minute interview or a 30-minute interview, but you really need to pay attention to how the interview is going, into the verbal and physical cues that your interviewee is sending you. So it might be that they're able to go for much longer and they have a lot of interesting things to say, in which case you might want to let that happen. And it could be that your participant starts to get tired and you need to cut the interview short, and you need to let that happen too, even though it might not be ideal for you. It's always about what's best for the participant. So pay attention to how your interviewee is feeling, and use it as a gauge in terms of if you're should go a little longer or should stop. Now, the other thing that you need to think about is where are you going to have these interviews? So I do a lot of my research in educational settings, and so for me, this first point here about a private and comfortable place. For classroom teachers, that's in their classroom. For students, that's in a private room somewhere in the building. But you want to pick some place that your interviewee is going to be comfortable. And, it might make sense to ask them where they would like to have the interview at. And so at the end of the day, it's the place that makes the most sense for your interview. There's not a right or wrong answer here. Be open to rescheduling. Know that no study is perfect, and your interview may get pushed back because of things that you can't control. And then the other thing to think about when you're setting up your interviews is that you might find yourself in a situation where you're interviewing multiple people, and you might want to bang out multiple interviews in a day, which makes sense. It's nice, and you can get it done. But remember that interviewing is taxing on you as an interviewer, because it requires very close listening skills. It requires you to be analytic in the moment. You have to be paying attention to if your questions are being answered, if you have follow-up questions. And after a while, this gets to be very tiring. So I would say 2 to 3 interviews, 20 to 30 minutes each is plenty per day. I would not do more than 90 minutes of interviewing in a given day. As the interviewer, there's a number of qualities that you are going to be developing, and I've listed some of them off here. But the general idea is, you're going to learn to be a good listener. You're going to learn how to sit down and have conversations with people in a very non-threatening, caring manner. And sometimes these are going to be conversations about difficult topics. So you're going to learn how to make relationships, how to make connections with people. But you're also, as you're doing this, you're going to learn what I think is one of the most important things about being an interviewer is being analytic in the moment, which means paying attention and being mindful to what is happening in the interview and knowing the kinds of follow-up questions you need to ask in order to get at what it is that you are trying to learn. So there's a number of qualities that you will always be developing. And an integral part of being an interviewer is being an active listener. So as your participant, you ask your question, and as your participant is responding, you're constantly thinking about what was said, what was not said. Does what your participant said, does it answer the question that you asked? If not, do you need to ask it again? Do you need to rephrase it? What additional questions do you have? These are things that you're constantly having to go through while you're having your interview. And then finally, there are some typical problems that as an interviewer, any of us can run up against. And some of these you can head off at before you even get to the point where you're interviewing someone. And others you can just be mindful of and address them if they should come up in your interview. And the first thing is make sure you've got all your equipment. Make sure you have materials, make sure you have batteries, make sure you have your questions with you, make sure you've got an audio recorder if that's how you're recording the interview. Make sure you have 2 audio recorders in case one doesn't work. Make sure you have batteries for your recorders, and then make sure you have backup batteries. And then if you really want, you can have backup batteries for your backup batteries. But it sounds a little silly, but when you get there, and if you do have a problem, you'll be thankful that you've got some extra materials around to help you be able to go ahead and complete the interview. Make sure that your questions are getting answered. It's not, sometimes you ask a question and the participant doesn't answer it. They respond, but they don't give you the answer that addresses the question. And it's not that they don't want to do that. They likely think that they are answering the question. You may have to ask it again or reword it. But the thing to pay attention to here is you've got to always make sure that you are getting the information to the best of the ability that the participant can give it to you. So you're always listening, you're always making sure that your questions are getting asked and they're getting answered in a way that is working for you. You might find that your participants don't provide many details. Now, sometimes this can be true in an initial interview, particularly if people have never been interviewed before. You might find that the first interview doesn't go particularly well, and I find this to be true. I've interviewed a lot of adolescents, and in the first interview that we have, I know it's going to be short. Sometimes they're only 10 minutes long, and I know they're not going to provide that many details for the most part because they're just not used to it. The setting is weird. They're not used to being asked questions about the things that I'm asking them questions about. But once they get through the first one, if you find that your first interview with somebody is a little rough, the subsequent interviews usually go much better because people know what to expect and they know what's expected of them. So if your first interview falls a little short, that's okay. I would assume that if they've never been interviewed before, that would be pretty normal. All right, and talking too much. Sometimes you might ask a question and you want the participant obviously to talk and respond, but the participant can go on, some of them, forever and ever and ever and ever, and eventually they wind off topic and they're talking about something else. So again, this goes back to active listening, and then you might need to, as politely as possible, redirect the conversation back onto the question. So just because a participant is talking extensively, that doesn't necessarily mean it's contributing anything to the interview, so be mindful of that. And finally, sometimes participants make contradictory or confusing statements, and if that's the case, again, active listening will help you take charge of that and help you redirect that in the manner that you want it to go in.